Professor Richard Wolff drops by. What happens when a currency is devalued? What does that mean? Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. How often I get to do a really deep dive with somebody whose mind I am in awe of and whose career and thoughts and work I have tremendous respect for. But that's what we're going to do right now with Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of Democracy at Work.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent is The Sickness is the System: When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. His website's Democracy at Work.info and rdwolf with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at ProfWolf with 2fs. And Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. It's always great having you on Thursday, and thanks so much for agreeing to just do a real deep dive here for the hour with us. I really appreciate it. I'd like to start out by asking what may be a really stupid question. I was watching, Louise and I have been binge watching The Crown, and there's this moment in the movie where the British Prime Minister confronts the reality that the pound has to be devalued, and what the consequences of that will be. They devalue the pound by 20% overnight. I was actually years ago in Israel when something very similar happened. And the result, of course, was that anything outside the country that was purchased became 20% more expensive. And the comment in the movie was England just became 20% poorer. I realize that's not technically true, but if I've got $100,000 sitting in a savings account in the bank, and the federal government says, okay, we're going to devalue the currency by 20%, which, by the way, is a lot less than they've devalued our currency since 1980. But, overnight, we're going to devalue it by 20%. So now I only have $80,000 worth of purchasing power with my $100,000. Where did the $20,000 worth of purchasing power go? What am I missing here in this question?
You're not missing anything. The answer, luckily, is very easy. The 20% lost by the British was gained by anybody wanting from another country to buy something British, because before I got $100,000 for whatever my currency was, I got 100,000 of the British currency, but after a devaluation of the British currency, it's worth less. My money, my American money, for example, is going to get me more British currency than it did before. In other words, the British, their currency is worth less, so if I'm an American and I have dollars, I can get more British pounds because they devalued. So what the British lose if they want to buy things from outside the country, folks outside the country gain the exact same amount because they now have a cheaper pound to pay for everything. So, for example, if you devalue the pound by 20%, and you're an American who buys, for example, from Great Britain, Scotch whiskey, which comes from Scotland, well, now, when you take your dollar, you're not going to get as many British pounds as you did before. You're going to get more because the British pound is now cheaper. It's become cheaper, so you get more of them. But the British price of the Scotch whiskey remains denominated in pounds. You get more pounds for your dollar, so your purchasing power has gone up, the exact offset of the declining purchasing power of the British. And by the way, the idea of this, the economics behind it, is really quite simple. Because foreigners now find that they can get more British pounds than they did before, because that's what devaluation means, everything in England looks to other people to be cheaper. Just like to the English, everything that they get from the rest of the world has now become more expensive because they have to give up more of their pounds to get the foreign currency. So the idea is it will stimulate English exports because everybody wants to buy the now cheaper British goods, and it will stop the British from importing as much as they did because everything costs them more since their currency is not as valuable as it once was.
So from a nation's point of view, that seems like a rational way. Now, it may not be a functional way, but at least in theory, a rational way to deal with some of the problems of international trade. I mean, we've got other countries that have very specific obstacles to trade, from VAT taxes to tariffs to standards that our exported goods can't meet. And so we have this huge balance of payments deficit. We import more than we export. Is devaluing your currency a reasonable way to deal with that trade problem and encourage factories to come back to the United States, domestic U.S. production? Is this something that we should consider or pursue, or are the side effects of it so draconian or so drastic or so destructive that it should be avoided at all costs unless you're forced into it as the British were?
Well, usually the answer to that is it's a political struggle. It turns out that the same people that are getting advantaged in some way by a devaluation are also offset by the people who are hurt by it inside your own country. So, for example, if you're an exporter, let's take your example of devaluing the British pound. If you're a British company that sells in the rest of the world, you're going to love this, because all that the government has done will make your goods, which continue to have the same price in British pounds that they always did, they will appear to be cheaper, because people outside the country will have to give up fewer of their currency to get the British pound because it was devalued. So you, as an exporter, you will do very nicely. You're going to have more business. You're going to have more customers. But now let's take a look at an importer in England. For example, a company that buys, I'll pick something, butter from Denmark, because there is a lot of that. You're now, if you're in Britain, you're going to have to give up more of your currency to get a pound of Danish butter than you did before. So consumers, for example, in England, who buy imported goods are going to face a real shock, because they're all going to go up by 10 or 20% in the face of a devaluation. So it's good news for the British exporter, it's bad news for the British importer. And then you look at the rest of society and see, are you more affected by the rising price of imports, or are you more affected by the growing demand for the country's exports? And that's going to be different. Different communities, different regions, different industries are going to be very differently affected. And that's why you will always find, if you do the work, that before any devaluation, there are major conflicts in the Parliament, in Congress, at the executive level, between the lobbyists coming from those who will be hurt by a devaluation and push against it, versus those who will be helped by a devaluation and push for it. And whether or not you get the devaluation is really simply determined by the relative strengths of the two sides.
And so it's as much a political problem as an economic one? Is that how these typically play out?
I would go further. I would say it's mostly a political problem. Devaluation is somehow always on the agenda. There are always some industries that are having a hard time that would here based in this country, and they will go to the government, for example, and say, to be stark about it, look, you either devalue, and thereby we can sell goods around the world, we'll have a big demand for them. But if you don't do it, I'm going to close the factory and move overseas because I can't make it any other way. So you have not just give me the devaluation so I can be more profitable, you have the
Thom Hartmann Program.